10 minutes past 7 now. Air and sea rescue teams are continuing to search an area of the South China Sea for the airliner that disappeared on a flight to Beijing on Friday night.
Yes, other teams are investigating the identities of some of the people on board. Interpol has confirmed that 2 passengers were travelling on stolen passports.
Joining us now is Tony Smith, the former head of the UK Border Force. Very good morning to you.
Good morning.
Perhaps you could use some of your expertise and knowledge to explain to us how this could have happened, that 2 people got on the plane travelling on what now we know are stolen passports.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is to say is let's not jump to any conclusions about that these were terrorists. We don't know the facts yet, and it's not uncommon actually for people to board aircraft around the world using other people's passports. It's normally for migratory purposes. It's a method used by human traffickers to get people into the West. So these were European passports essentially.
But for those of us who go through an airport, take our shoes and socks off, belts, all that kind of thing, and all of that fuss that goes on when you go through passport control, would be amazed to hear you say that. It's not uncommon.
Well, this is the difference between looking for the bomb and looking for the bomber. I mean, you're right, you do go through thorough, rigorous search, and we're assuming that everybody on board that plane did go through search. So, you know, people would have gone through the physical search to find if there was an object taken on board, and actually aviation security is really, really good in that respect. Very, very thorough physical checks on people. What's less clear is the checks on the person, and, you know, if you're travelling with your passport, well, what happens to the data that you give to the airline when you travel? You know, who gets that data, and who sends it to who, and who checks it before the plane takes off? So, although we're very good at checking people when they arrive at our borders, we're not so good at checking people at boarding stage.
Well, it's very interesting, and this becomes significant. So these 2 people get onto a plane in Kuala Lumpur. They obviously hand a passport in. That's looked at. You make the assumption that the officer there looks at the picture and it corresponds because the picture could have been changed. But people will be assuming that looking at that passport, it will go through a system, and that that was cross-referenced against stolen passports. Are you saying that just doesn't routinely happen?
I am saying it doesn't routinely happen, no. I mean, there's about 800 million hits a year against the Interpol lost and stolen database. But I mean, 250 million of those were in the US, 120 million here in the UK. So not all countries actually access that database. So we don't know really what happened in Kuala Lumpur that day. I mean, the passport should have been checked by a border official from the Malaysian authorities. It seems as though that official did not, for one reason or another, check the Interpol database. The passport was clearly fraudulent in some way. Either it was a look-alike, which we call, you know, just an imposter, and that's quite often, it's quite difficult to tamper with these things these days and take photographs out. Or there may have been collusion on the ground. I mean, there are criminal gangs infiltrating airports and even control agencies, I'm afraid, to get people on board planes, because the prize is a passage to the West. And when you're in the West, then the prize is that you can get to stay here, and it's an economic gain. So it's not automatically, a security breach as such, but it is worrying, isn't it, that airlines can't routinely and don't routinely access this database. And what we would like to see is that database is made more widely available to transportation companies and doesn't have to go through a process of going to government to do checks, which takes a long time.
The immediate mystery with this plane, of course, is where it is. But what you're saying begs the question. I mean, I read somewhere that it suggested that on almost any plane carrying 250 people, there'll be 2 or 3 travelling on a false passport. I mean, is that scaremongering, or is there an element of truth in that? Because what you're suggesting says, frankly, we don't know.
The latest figures we have is we know, data's not routinely available at how many people do get offloaded, but we knew that about 50,000 people were offloaded a few years. When I was head of borders, 2007, we offloaded 50,000 people in a year who were trying to get to this country, and for one reason or another we spotted the document wasn't right before they got on board the plane. I mean, if you weigh that against 120 million travellers coming into the country, it's quite a small number. But I mean, the idea is to try to push the border out nowadays, because we've got technology, we've got computers, and so if we can get, really rigorous checks done at the point of disembarkation abroad, which ultimately ultimately is the jurisdiction of the Malaysian authorities. We've got no authority to go there and do that. If we can persuade them to use these tools and to encourage other governments to make use of the tools available, including forgery detection techniques, not just, because not all documents are lost and stolen, it's possible to make one up from nothing and they wouldn't be on a database. So you really need well-trained people at the check-in who have got the expert knowledge how to spot an imposter and to stop them travelling to crack down on this.
Tony Smith, thanks very much indeed for joining us this morning.
Let's see, the time now is 7:15. Let's have a look at the weather with Carol.